This video explores the Book of Enoch's most disturbing prophecy about the end times. It explains what the Book of Enoch is, why it mattered in the ancient world, and how it presents the end of history not as random destruction, but as the completion of a long-delayed judgment. The video focuses on Enoch's teaching about imprisoned angels, sealed records, and a final period when hidden spiritual events are brought into the open. Using real information from the text, it shows how Enoch connects ancient angelic rebellion to the last days, and why he believed the end would reveal what humanity was never meant to see. The Book of Enoch is an ancient Jewish religious work written roughly between the 3rd century BCE and the 1st century BCE. It is not part of the Hebrew Bible or most modern Christian Bibles, but large sections of it were discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls. That discovery confirmed that the book was circulating among Jewish communities more than 2,000 years ago. Early Christians were also familiar with it. The New Testament letter of Jude directly quotes the Book of Enoch, which shows that its language and ideas about angels and judgment were already known in the 1st century. The Book of Enoch is not one single book written at one moment. It is a collection of writings produced over time. These writings focus on the order of heaven, the actions of angels, the corruption of the earth, and the final judgment of both spiritual beings and humanity. When Enoch speaks about the end times, he does not begin by listing disasters. He begins by explaining why judgment exists at all. At the very start, Enoch says his visions are meant for a future generation. He says his message is for a time when wrongdoing has increased and when God's judgment will finally be revealed openly. This sets the framework of the entire book. Enoch is not trying to explain his own age. He is presenting the background to a final period he believes will come much later. Before describing the last days, the Book of Enoch explains what it presents as the original cause of deep corruption on the earth. In chapters 6 through 16, Enoch introduces a group of angels called the Watchers. According to the text, they were assigned to observe humanity. Their role was oversight. They were not created to rule humans or to reshape human society. The book states that some of these angels abandoned their assigned position. They gathered together, made a collective oath, and descended to earth. The text names several of these angels, including Semjaza and Azazel, and identifies Mount Hermon as the place where they swore their oath. This is presented not as symbolism, but as a deliberate violation of heavenly order. After descending, these angels took human women and lived among humans. The Book of Enoch also says they began to teach knowledge that had not been permitted. The list is specific. It includes the working of metals, the making of weapons and armor, enchantments, astrology, the use of roots and plants, and the use of cosmetics to alter appearance. The book does not claim that knowledge itself is evil. It connects these teachings to how they were used and to the effect they had on human behavior. According to Enoch, violence increased, social order weakened, bloodshed spread, power became associated with domination, moral restraint declined. From these unions came beings described as giants. The book portrays them as violent and destructive. It states that they consumed the resources of the earth and eventually turned against humanity. The result, according to Enoch, was widespread devastation. This condition of extreme corruption is presented as the reason divine intervention followed. The Book of Enoch then describes a coordinated response involving archangels. Raphael is instructed to bind Azazel and place him in darkness. Gabriel is directed to bring destruction upon the giants. Michael is commanded to bind the remaining watchers. Uriel is sent to inform Noah of the coming flood. This sequence is important because it shows how Enoch understands the flood. In his account, it is not only a response to human wrongdoing, it is also a response to angelic rebellion. But the Book of Enoch makes something very clear. The watchers are not destroyed. They are confined. Enoch repeatedly says they are bound in underground places of imprisonment. These locations are described as dark and separated from heaven. The angels remain conscious and aware. They are shown witnessing the destruction of what they produced. The text uses a phrase that becomes central to everything Enoch later says about the end times. The watchers are bound until the day of their judgment. This language means their punishment is incomplete. Their final sentencing is delayed. This delayed judgment becomes the foundation of Enoch's end times prophecy. Later sections describe Enoch being shown different regions of the unseen world. He is shown places prepared for future punishment. He sees angels assigned to specific tasks. He sees elements of nature held under authority. Winds, stars, seasons, and waters are described as operating according to fixed laws. The book also emphasizes record keeping. Enoch repeatedly refers to heavenly books. These books contain the deeds of humans and angels. Judgment is presented as a formal process based on what has been recorded. Actions are not forgotten. They are preserved. In the Book of Enoch, the end times are when these records are opened. Enoch also describes the condition of the world as it moves closer to this final period. He speaks of injustice becoming established. He describes the misuse of authority. He refers to the oppression of the righteous and the protection of the corrupt. He notes the spread of deception and the decline of moral boundaries. The text does not treat this only as social decay. It links these conditions to the earlier disruption caused by the Watchers. The implication is that human systems were altered by an ancient breach of order, and that those altered systems continue to shape behavior. Another major theme in Enoch is order. The book describes the natural world as structured. The stars follow appointed paths. The seasons move in set cycles. Winds and waters operate under command. Angels are described as overseeing these processes. Human society, by contrast, is presented as operating without restraint. Enoch repeatedly criticizes the abandonment of limits, the misuse of power, and the distortion of justice. This contrast between cosmic order and human disorder supports his central claim. When established order is rejected, judgment follows. Enoch's visions of the final period include the release of appointed angels, the presentation of imprisoned beings for judgment, and the removal of corrupt authority. He describes a central judicial authority before whom kings, powers, and spiritual beings are held accountable. The emphasis throughout these passages is not spectacle. It is accountability. The end times in Enoch's framework are when hidden actions are exposed, when unresolved spiritual rebellion is formally judged, and when delayed sentences are executed. Within this view, the end of the world is not random destruction. It is the conclusion of a long process that began when heavenly order was first violated. The final age is when that violation is fully addressed. This foundation explains why the Book of Enoch connects ancient angelic rebellion directly to the last days. The end times are not presented as the beginning of something new. They are presented as the completion of something very old. And according to Enoch, it is only when this ancient matter is finally resolved that human history itself reaches its end. After laying the foundation of ancient rebellion and delayed judgment, the Book of Enoch shifts its focus to what happens when that delay ends. The later sections of the book describe a final period when authority changes, hidden structures are exposed, and judgment moves from restraint to action. One of the central features of Enoch's end times vision is the appearance of a figure he repeatedly calls the Elect One, or the Son of Man. This figure is introduced most clearly in the portion scholars call the parables of Enoch. Enoch says he was shown a chosen figure who existed before the creation of the world and was revealed in the last days. This figure is not described as an ordinary king. He is presented as one who receives authority directly from God to judge, to remove corrupt power, and to vindicate the righteous. Enoch states that this elect one will sit on a throne of glory. Kings, rulers, and the powerful are brought before him. Their authority is not honored. It is examined. He says their secrets will be exposed and their works weighed. This scene establishes that the end times in Enoch's understanding are not controlled by human institutions. Political, religious, and economic power structures are all subject to a higher court. Another repeated theme is reversal. Enoch describes the powerful of the earth losing their position. He says those who built their strength on violence, deception, and injustice will no longer be able to hide behind wealth or status. Their words will no longer protect them. Their alliances will no longer shield them. At the same time, Enoch describes the righteous being gathered and protected. He does not portray them as a ruling class. He portrays them as witnesses, people who endured corruption rather than benefiting from it, people whose actions were recorded even when they were ignored. This is why record keeping becomes so important in Enoch's end times vision. He repeatedly refers to books being opened. These books contain deeds, words, and decisions. Judgment is not based on claims. It is based on what has been preserved. In Enoch's framework, nothing is truly hidden. The final age is when stored evidence becomes public. Enoch also describes a major shift in how heaven interacts with the world. Earlier, angels were observers. In the end times sections, angels become executors. He describes angels who are assigned to remove kings from their seats, angels who are appointed over punishment, angels who gather the righteous, angels who escort the condemned. The spiritual world is no longer distant. It becomes active. Another key feature of Enoch's prophecy is cosmic disturbance. He speaks of changes in the heavens, not primarily as astronomy, but as signs of authority being rearranged. He describes stars that no longer keep their proper order. In the Book of Enoch, stars often symbolize angelic powers. Their disorder represents a restructuring of spiritual hierarchy. This fits with his larger theme. The end times are not only about human judgment, they are about a realignment of the unseen world. Enoch also speaks of confinement and release. Just as certain angels were bound in the past, he describes appointed angels being released in the last days to carry out specific roles. The language is administrative. Tasks are assigned. Limits are enforced. Judgment is executed step by step. This structured presentation removes randomness from his prophecy. The end times are not chaos. They are controlled action. Another major subject in Enoch's final visions is the fate of corrupt systems. He describes oppressive structures collapsing, not only individual people being judged, but entire patterns of injustice being dismantled. He says those who built their power on exploitation will see their foundations removed. Their influence will not pass to successors. It will end. This is where Enoch's prophecy becomes especially remembered. He repeatedly emphasizes that the earth itself testifies. He speaks of violence crying out, of injustice reaching heaven. In his view, creation has been affected by corruption, and creation participates in the judgment process. This is also why punishment is not limited to people. Enoch says the watchers themselves are brought out from their places of confinement. They are no longer hidden. They are presented before judgment. Their long restraint ends, and their final sentencing begins. He describes this moment as public, not only to heaven, but in a way that the world recognizes that something older than human history is being resolved. This presentation of the watchers is one of the most distinctive aspects of Enoch's end times prophecy. In most biblical texts, fallen angels are background figures. In Enoch, they are defendants. Their actions are reviewed. Their influence is addressed. Their future is sealed. Enoch also gives attention to timing. In a section often called the Apocalypse of Weeks, he divides human history into symbolic periods. These periods move from early righteousness through increasing corruption, through partial restorations, and finally into a last era where judgment and renewal occur together. This structure reinforces his central claim. The end times are part of a long progression, not an interruption. As these visions continue, Enoch describes the final period as both destructive and restorative. Corruption is removed, but something new is established. He speaks of a renewed earth where righteousness is no longer marginalized. He says truth becomes stable. Violence ceases. The righteous dwell without fear. Authority is no longer divided between competing powers. This restoration, however, only follows judgment. Enoch never presents renewal without accountability. The transformation of the world comes after the removal of what distorted it. Another repeated element in these passages is permanence. The punishments he describes are not temporary corrections. They are final. He speaks of lasting confinement, irreversible loss of power, and an established order that is not undone. This is why he treats the end times as the closing stage of history. The old conflicts do not continue into another cycle. They end. Throughout these visions, Enoch returns again and again to one point. The last days are when hidden relationships between heaven and earth are revealed. Humans see that their history was not isolated. They see that unseen beings shaped cultures, influenced violence, and distorted authority. And they see those influences removed. In this sense, the most terrifying part of Enoch's prophecy is not imagery. It is implication. The end times, according to this text, are when humanity finally understands how much of its world was never neutral and how much of it is finally being judged. The final sections of the Book of Enoch move fully into what the text presents as the closing phase of history. The visions no longer explain why judgment exists or who will administer it. They describe what happens when that judgment is carried out and what follows afterward. Enoch repeatedly describes the last period as a time when separation takes place. Human beings are no longer treated as one mass. Spiritual beings are no longer hidden behind distance. The text presents a clear division between the righteous and the corrupt, between obedient angels and rebellious ones, between what remains and what is removed. One of the strongest themes in these closing visions is the public nature of judgment. Enoch says that nothing remains private. The deeds of kings, the influence of corrupt authorities, and the actions of spiritual beings are all brought into open examination. He describes this process using courtroom language. Thrones are set, records are opened, testimony is reviewed, decisions are pronounced. In this framework, judgment is not reaction, it is procedure. Enoch emphasizes that those who held power on earth will not retain it. He speaks of rulers who once controlled nations standing without protection. Their wealth does not shield them. Their titles do not speak for them. Their influence does not continue. What defined them in history no longer carries authority in the final accounting. At the same time, Enoch repeatedly refers to the righteous being gathered. He describes them being separated from the corrupt systems they lived under. He speaks of them being preserved, protected, and finally placed where injustice no longer reaches them. He does not portray them as rewarded with domination. He portrays them as released from oppression. The book also continues to return to the fate of the Watchers. These angels, who were bound in the ancient world, are brought out for final judgment. Enoch describes their confinement ending not in freedom, but in sentencing. Their long restraint moves into permanent consequence. They are no longer observers. They are defendants. Their actions are reviewed. Their influence is terminated. Enoch presents this moment as central to the end times. The resolution of angelic rebellion is not a side event. It is one of the main acts of final judgment. The book treats the removal of these beings as essential to the restoration of order. Another important element in these closing chapters is the role of creation itself. Enoch repeatedly describes the earth responding to judgment. He speaks of corruption being removed from it, of violence no longer marking it, of disorder being replaced with stability. This is not described as symbolic. It is presented as the correction of a condition that existed for most of human history. He also describes changes in the heavens. He speaks of the movements of stars being corrected, of heavenly order being fully restored, of spiritual authority no longer divided or contested. This emphasis reinforces a central idea in Enoch's theology. The end times are not only the end of human injustice, they are the end of cosmic disorder. The book also describes the permanence of what follows. Enoch does not present the final judgment as another cycle. He does not speak of further rebellions, further floods, or future corrections. He describes a settled state, an established order, a world in which the causes of corruption no longer operate. He speaks of a renewed earth where righteousness is stable, not threatened, where fear is absent because injustice is absent, where authority is unified rather than competing. This renewal is not presented as humanity returning to an earlier stage. It is presented as humanity entering a condition that never previously existed. Another significant aspect of these passages is the removal of deceptive power. Enoch repeatedly speaks of false authorities losing influence, of misleading teachings no longer shaping societies, of violence no longer being rewarded, of domination no longer functioning as leadership. This removal is not described as gradual reform. It is described as decisive elimination. This is why the book treats the end times as terrifying, not because of imagery alone, but because nothing false survives them. Enoch makes it clear that no structure built on injustice continues. No power rooted in corruption adapts. No spiritual influence that oppose divine order remains active. Everything associated with the ancient breach is addressed. Another detail often overlooked is that Enoch connects the final judgment to knowledge. He says that wisdom is no longer hidden, that truth is no longer fragmented, that understanding is no longer controlled by corrupt sources. In this final state, knowledge no longer produces pride or violence. It aligns with moral order. This point directly contrasts with the Watchers' original teaching, where their knowledge distorted humanity. The restored order aligns humanity with justice. The Book of Enoch ends its prophetic sections not with destruction, but with stability. After judgment, after removal, after restoration, Enoch describes a world in which fear no longer structures life, where righteous people are not pressured into silence, where authority does not depend on force, where creation functions without disruption. In this sense, the end in Enoch is not extinction. It is closure. The closure of rebellion, the closure of corruption, the closure of divided authority, the closure of a spiritual crisis that shaped the entire human story. When Enoch says his words are for a distant generation, this is what he means. He is not describing ancient history. He is describing the resolution of ancient history, the point where everything introduced before the flood is finally addressed. This is why his end times prophecy stands apart from many later apocalyptic texts. He does not treat the last days as a single disaster. He treats them as a comprehensive accounting. He explains why judgment must happen. He shows who carries it out. He describes how it unfolds, and he defines what remains afterward. The most terrifying aspect of Enoch's prophecy is not the punishment it describes. It is the scale of what is involved. According to this book, the end times are not only the end of human injustice, they are the end of a spiritual system that shaped humanity from the beginning. They are when hidden influence is removed, when authority is clarified, when history is closed, and when the world finally exists without the forces that corrupted it. This is how the Book of Enoch presents the end of all things, not as chaos overtaking order, but as order finally overtaking chaos, not as the collapse of meaning, but as the moment meaning is fully enforced, and not as the disappearance of the world, but as the point when the world becomes what it was never allowed to be before. If this video helped you understand the Book of Enoch in a deeper and clearer way, then take a moment to support the work. Click like so this research can reach more people who are searching for real answers. Subscribe to the channel because the topics we know today shape how we understand what is coming next. And share this video with someone who studies scripture, history, or ancient texts, because these conversations matter. Your support allows us to keep researching, reading original sources, and presenting them carefully. Thank you for watching, and thank you for being part of a community that values truth over noise.